love you almost.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
Hey, Lee, how are you doing?
Okay, yeah, good, doing well. How are you?
Not too bad. So it's
Whoops,
exciting.
it just disappeared on me.
Oh,
Where are you?
it
Oh,
should-
there we go.
oh,
Okay.
there we go. All right. You gotta love
Okay.
technology, right? All right. So you got the new record coming out tail end of November, just as you promised. There was going to be new music come the end of the year. So tell us about the record Elevate.
You could probably describe Elevate as our COVID baby, because we weren't able to tour. Like Radio One came out last year at July, and we were hoping to get out and do some shows. And of course, everything got shut down again at the end of last year. So we were actually only able to start really doing shows for Radio One the summer of this year. So in the interim between then, we were like, well, what else are we going to do? So we started writing some more songs. And the interesting thing about Elevate, like every album, we've approached every album just a little bit differently. We only had a few tunes written, and I said, what about this idea? How about I just go book the studio time, and then we just like kind of furiously force ourselves to get it together. And that's kind of what we did. I had seen an interview with Jack White, who's one of my favorite artists and guitar players, and he said that he tends to do that. He'll just block out the studio time, and then in the process of doing that, he puts himself in a position where he's forcing himself into a deadline, and it was kind of neat to do it that way, because when we knew we had a deadline to go into the studio, we all stepped up to the plate with song ideas. And by the time we went in August of last year, we had 14 tracks. Yeah. And then 10 of them, of course, ended up on Elevate. So, yeah.
Is it safe to say that this particular record's more of a collaborative effort as a unit than the previous record?
No.
Okay.
No, I got to tell you, Radio One was written my favorite way, which is getting us all in a room together and just bouncing ideas back and forth. So that was an extremely collaborative effort. This album, I would say, was equally collaborative, but it was written in a slightly different manner because we were under COVID lockdown restrictions. So it was basically written by sending a lot of files back and forth. But we've even simplified our process further, because previously we would sort of do a sort of quasi-finished demo, and I'd send it to the guys, or conversely, Sean Kelly would put down a guitar riff with a drum beat, and so it was a little more defined. We're not even, what we tended to do on this album was we were just recording little iPhone memos, blah blah blah, and or he would play it on acoustic guitar and just shoot me off an idea. So it left a lot more open space for it to be more collaborative, because the drum beat wasn't defined. Like, so John, our drummer, had no idea in his head what the expectation was for the drum parts. So it ended up being very, very collaborative in that way. Yeah. And, the way we write, for instance, a song like Red Dress, which is the ballad on the album, I had sat down and hashed it out on piano. So it was basically a fairly fully formed idea when I brought it to the guys in the band. But, it takes on a different personality, and it goes to another level when, Dave is adding his bass part, John is adding the drum part, and Sean, puts whatever guitar thing he's hearing on it. Right. And likewise, like Dave sometimes brings in ideas that are, it's a riff with parts, and he's got a melody, but he has no words, so it's, 3/4 of the way formed, but he needs the rest of us to complete it. So if that makes any sense. Sometimes more of us have written more of one song or less than another, but we always divide things equally as a four-way split, because what incentive is there to be in the music industry anymore if you're
Right.
not splitting everything equally? Because there's just, you know what it's like, you know?
Yeah. Tell me about the opening tune, because that one has a little bit more of a kind of a social consciousness kind of the times type vibe to it. Tell me about that and how that kind of shaped up as a tune, and why you selected that as the opening tune on the new record.
Yeah, well, that's thanks for noticing that. Elevate as well has a bit of,
Yeah.
is definitely
Good way to open and close.
yeah. Um, I don't know. I think just as I've become a more uh, an older art and more mature artist, that I'm interested in writing about things that are a little more meaningful than just boy meets girl. Of course, there's still room for that in a fun way, because that's obviously that's sort of the foundation of rock and roll are those songs, right? But yeah, there's so much craziness in the world these days. And when Sean had sent me that riff, that opening riff, that da 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 da, it's such a cool riff. Um, Immediately, I thought this needs something really anthemic for the chorus. And of course, what I will do is I'll just put on ideas. When I tend to sometimes get my best ideas when I'm dividing my brain, if this makes sense. So I will play an idea over and over again while I'm cooking, or while I'm driving, or while I'm doing something where my brain is engaged in another sort of automatic activity. And sometimes that's when I come up with my best ideas. And so, yeah, I mean, this whole rock revolution idea, and I thought, well, that's a little cliche, but how could we twist that on its head and make it a bit different? So, yeah, the song is written about just the craziness that has gone on in the world in the last 5 years. From the insurrection in the United States and the Black Lives Matter riots, to just the way social media is being weaponized now. It's crazy. So yeah, I just was able to impart a lot of those thoughts and ideas into that tune, but make it a fun rock anthem, right?
And what about Elevate? Because again, you brought that up, and that was also like there was that link between the opener and the closing song, that there was more, I guess, more meat to it, so to speak, right? As far as the message.
Thank you. Yeah, David brought that idea, Elevate, into the fold in the 11th hour. We were going into the studio, and I'm like, dude, like, I love that idea, but I don't know. I wasn't sure we would have time to complete it. And miraculously, we ended up recording we had 13 bed tracks, we had them done, and we're like, we got like a couple hours of studio time left. I said, let's just go work up that idea. So we worked up that idea and literally recorded it in the 11th hour in the studio. And the only thing we had was, let's elevate. That's all we had. And I'm like, that's a social
Right,
song. We have
right.
to. And so one of the things that I'm constantly complaining to my kids about and my friends about is the way that social media has become such, like, it can be used for beautiful things like mobilizing people for a good cause, but it's used in so many toxic ways as well, to divide people, to tear people down. I am, people may think that I don't have, maybe a lot of these thoughts going on, because I'm very, very astutely aware that if I post the wrong thing, I'm setting myself up to get attacked on social media. I've posted a couple of very, very tepid things and had people go after me. So I'm very, very cautious now, but yeah. And so that's what the song is about. It's about, we should be using these wonderful technological tools that we have at our disposal for lifting each other up and mobilizing people in a positive way, rather than ripping each other down, which, yeah, I mean, I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, right. The other thing I was going to bring up was you're working with Mike Fraser again, and wow, again, you know, the sound of the record, kind of like with the last one, it's just really punchy and just everything comes together sonically. Um, is this going to be like a continuing partnership between yourself, the band, and Mike?
Sure hope so. I love Mike. He's one of my favorite people that I've ever worked with, and I don't just mean his sounds and his production values, and you know, uh, he's just an amazing person. He's a wonderful human being. He's a lovely friend. We, exchange recipes now. Like he told
Right,
me, mixing is a lot like cooking. There's so many different flavors, you can bring
right.
in. And so I really hope so. The only issue going forward, and it's funny because we talked a lot about this when we were mixing the last record. I was joking around with Mike because obviously I'm in the armory and we're in front of a vintage SSL console because it gives these wonderful sounds, and of course Mike is just like the guru of
Mhm.
that. I said, gee, Mike, like, because all of the people we're working with as assistant engineers and stuff, they're all in their 20s, and they're like, well, we just let Mike, work that because the young people are mostly learning to work in the box, right?
Oh,
With which is how I work at home. I have Logic Pro X and a small interface, and it's high quality, but that's
oh,
how I do all my stuff is on a little screen at my house. And Mike said, when it gets to the point where nobody has a budget to do this anymore, I might retire because he said, I don't want to be mixing, in my bedroom.
right.
Um, and that's kind of a sad thought. So I really, really hope Mike doesn't retire. And I really hope that I continue to be able to have the budgets to be able to work with him because he's just fabulous. And
Sure.
I love what he does with our music. So
Right, and just the discography, you know, all the people he's worked with and the great sounding records that he's made throughout his career. So, yeah, it's cool. You know, it definitely brought something to the couple records he's done with you guys. So, yeah, it's awesome. One thing that I had spoken to you about the last time we spoke, I think at that point, you know, the last record hit prior to it being released. But initially, you were supposed to be on the Monsters of Rock cruise. That kind of went south. It was supposed to be on the beach, and then that kind of got postponed. So this time around, you're back on for 23. You know, so about that. I mean, what any surprises? Obviously, you're not going to dish out the surprises, but I'm sure you're probably already thinking about the sets.
yeah, I can tell you that it will be a carefully crafted mix of new and old that we'll be performing, and we're just super stoked because it'll be one of the first times we've had to get in front of some of our American fans,
Right.
um, and you know, it'll hopefully feel a lot more relaxed and a
Mhm.
lot more safe than we might have felt if we had jumped on it this year. Not there's nobody that's super vulnerable in my band, but we did have some concerns about jumping into it this year when there was still it was in the middle of the COVID vaccine rollout and all that stuff. So we decided postponing it into 2023 would be the best plan, and yeah, it's going to be awesome. That's all I can tell you.
Well, that's cool. That's good to
Dusting off
hear.
a few of those, fabulous rock outfits.
Yeah, well, yeah, no kidding. You know, between the records, I mean, you got the Metal Queen, Call of the Wild, you know, Body Rock. Some girls do, you know what I mean? And you could fit all sorts of stuff from there. You know, as far as like even just remembering watching some of the videos on the Much Music that I was picking up on satellite here in the United States, which was a real treat because that's how I discovered your music. Um, Tell me about how comfortable you were, you know, initially with that Metal Queen type image, because I mean, it just seemed to me like that really wasn't you 100% at the time, and I think what you are doing now and what you evolved into is probably best suited for you. I don't know if I'm hitting the mark or completely off.
what you're saying, and it's interesting because I just had a very long conversation with a gentleman from Metalhama in Germany yesterday about this very subject. And, you know, I feel I'm doing my best work now. But with that said, there was nothing inauthentic about the writing for Metal Queen and the songs that appeared on that album. When I wrote the song Metal Queen, it was meant to be a pushback against all that crazy, you know, sexism in the 80s and the way women were treated like, you know, adornments and almost like objects back then, you know, made to dress up and make the guys look good. And so Metal Queen was a very feminist message. It was about women, you know, being on the top of our game and being able to be boss lady, you know, and that was the motivation behind that song. But because of the culture at that time and the era in which that song was released, I mean, I was only 21 years old, 22 when that came out, and it was I was 21. That's right. You know, I had an art director and a costume person, and they were like, let's, you know. So this whole idea, this gothic, you know, Xena like goddess, was not really my own creation. This was a fabrication of the record label and the art direction of that you know, at the time. And so to some degree it was presented like a bit of a cartoon character, right? And so, but it was definitely memorable. Nobody forgot about it because I still get asked about it 7 years later. Here we are, right? So the nice thing is, it's, you know, it's come full circle for me. For a while, I didn't even want to perform that song because I am not a one-dimensional, you know, hard rock chick that is not capable of doing anything else. You know, I did a diversion into jazz and blues. I've done an opera, performed in an opera here locally in Vancouver. I've produced every one of my albums since the year 2000. I do have other skill sets, right? And so I would like to feel that at this point in time, two things, you know, that people now, you know, especially male journalists that are grown up now, they go, oh my gosh, Lee, I get it. I get what you were doing back then. I get the feminist message, but when I was a 14-year-old boy, I couldn't get it. And, fair enough, right? Fair enough. So yeah, so people, it's become more of a like just a sort of a crown to wear, a term of respect. And I feel that especially the fans that have hung in for years through thick and thin, they have so much respect and appreciation for what myself and the band are putting out artistically now, right? So yeah.
And I'm looking forward to seeing you on the cruise. But in the meantime, I did, you know, back in, I think, was it 2019 when you put out the CD DVD package, you know, that live power, soul, and rock and roll. That's awesome. So I'm looking forward to, you know, checking you out live because I do enjoy that package. As far as things go, I mean, it seems like you picked up steam in Europe first, so they were. I don't know what it was like for you in Canada. Obviously, I mentioned earlier that Much Music was playing your videos and stuff like that. But is it safe to say that Europe kind of was where you kind of started breaking some ground there and gathering some momentum?
Europe is where I first needed to find a home. And I'll explain why. When I hit the scene with my very first album in 1982, there was nobody, and I mean nobody, in Canada that was female doing rock or hard rock. No, like, I mean, nobody. So, you know, this was the land of Gordon Lightfoot and Anne Murray and Joni Mitchell. And don't get me wrong, I think like Joni's one of my favorite artists. She's amazing. But Canadian radio was not playing anything hard. I was a real fish out of water here. I was an anomaly. And especially when the Metal Queen video hit right at the advent of Much Music, the media was taken aback by me here. They were kind of like, they didn't know what to make of me. So to establish myself, I had to go to Europe, where they just were at that. Don't get me wrong, Canada's not like that now, but they were just much more open-minded. I was treated like an artist, a rock and roll singer who happened to be female, whereas in Canada, I was treated as a female artist that was doing hard rock. That was the difference. Of course, by the time myself and multiple other sort of hard rocking females were definitely not the norm in the early to mid 80s, but we had to break down a lot of barriers. And then by the 90s, it was completely acceptable for women to pick up guitars and rock out and be respected. And then it paved the way for people like Alanis and Avril Lavigne.
Right. There you go.
Like them here in Canada. And now that's, it's just not an issue anymore. But yeah.
Nice. So, yeah. And how important was it for you to break into America? Because I know, a lot of the European bands, artists would, that's what they set their target on. It's let's break in America. In your case, Canada wasn't quite ready for you. You hit Europe. Where did America fall in on your radar?
So, when we were young in our 20s, everybody wanted to break in America. Everybody. But few Canadian and European artists did. And a lot of that wasn't because the quality of work wasn't there. A lot of it was political, and a lot of it was which record deal you signed and who was in charge of your A&R. And previous to signing to my first label, Attic Records, in Canada, which was the biggest independent label in Canada distributed by A&M, I had been down in the States and I'd done a showcase at the Troubadour, and I had a few American labels very, very interested in signing me. I don't know if I've ever really even told this story. And my manager in Canada had teamed up with Eddie Leffler in LA, who was Van Halen's manager.
Yeah.
And Ed had said to him, don't talk to anybody, make them wait. Don't take any deal, make them wait. I've got to fly to England. He had some business in England for a week. When I come back, let me talk to them, because obviously he had the American reputation and the American experience. Yeah. He slipped on some ice. It was December. He slipped on ice and threw his back out and ended up in a hospital in London for weeks.
Oh, no.
And in the meantime, we had the studio breathing down our back to pay back the spec fees. We had done the whole album on spec. Anyway, to make a long story short, I have no regrets. We ended up signing to Attic Records because my manager wanted to pay off the studio debt.
Right.
Not that was a bad choice. They served me very well over the years. They were lovely people to work with. But that made me a Canadian signing. And a lot of the American labels didn't want to help promote Canadian talent unless they were direct signings through the New York or LA office. So that created a bit of a political issue for me. I know over the years we tried to get many of my albums released down there, and things just didn't pan out. So I did some touring when I was very young on the Eastern Seaboard, and just on the strength of my albums as an import. So I guess I guess what I'd like to think is I have like a cult following in America.
Right.
and I'm aware of that.
Right.
Because I never had a proper big label release down there. So, was that a blessing or a curse? Some artists that had big hits then can't get out of the gate now, or nobody cares now. I still have this like career that's always bubbling under the surface. I've managed to keep sustaining for close to 40 years. And so I don't really have any regrets about that.
Cool.
you know.
I just got a couple more things and I'll cut you loose. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. So, uh, first question I have is if you had the opportunity to go back to the 80s, would you?
Well, um, in what way? Just like
To that
just
time, that
just
era.
like get into a time machine and go back and
Right, go back. Would you?
not permanently, but I'd go back for a week or two. That would be super fun.
What would you say? What would be the highlights of your time travel back into the 80s, you think?
Oh, to be footloose and fancy free of commitments and adult obligations. Are you kidding?
Right.
Because let me tell you, I mean, I've got two older teen children, 16 and 18. Got things going on in my life, and adulting is hard.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I'm getting pretty good at it, but you know, uh, just to go back to that free spirit time in my life would be fun. I mean, truthfully, every rock and roller, myself included, has like an 18-year-old that's just bubbling under the surface, that's dying to get out at any point in time. So my big opportunity for that is when I step onto a stage, strap on a guitar, and put on my leather motto, and I get to go, right?
Right. Okay, last question. I know we talked about kids. I have kids. I know how kids can be, especially as they get into, their teens, into adulthood. What's
If you're going to ask me, am I cool anymore? The answer is no.
the question is here, do you have a story of when your kids basically showed you humility, because their kids are great at that?
Um, showed me humility.
Yeah.
I can think of many times. Some of them would be far too embarrassing for my children to talk
Okay.
about on here,
Sure.
because let's be honest. You become the bottom wiping, peanut butter sandwich making, teeth brushing, person, right? When your kids, I think parenthood is kind of levels the playing field for everybody. But yeah, when my when my daughter was little, she came home from school in about grade 4, and I guess a couple of the parents kind of knew who I was, not because I told them, because I didn't meet other parents on the playground and go, "Hey, I'm Lee Aaron, the rock star."
Right.
I was, the mother of my children, and my daughter came home, and she was yeah, probably, you know, maybe, I don't know how old she was in grade 4, 8 or 9.
Right.
She's like, "Yeah, mom, this kid in my class said that you've got this cool video with like some robot thingy with laser beams." And I'm like, God, what is she? I
Right.
thought they must mean the Metal Queen video,
Yeah.
right? Because there's the
Right.
geyser, and then there's the fake laser beams that
Mhm.
come out of the eyes. And like, you got to remember, this is pre CGI or any of that
Sure.
technology,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, my cool moment. I'm going to show my kids the Metal Queen video. So she gets on my lap and we go to YouTube. And I'm like, she like literally lasted 15 seconds.
Oh
And it
no.
was just, there wasn't tons of stuff blowing up. It was like, could not compare remotely to any of the superhero films. And she just like, is like, she looks at me, she goes, "That's it?" She jumps off my lap, and it's like, great. I was able to hold my child's attention span for about 15 seconds.
Well, there.
Like, and it was pretty humiliating. I was like, okay, well, they so don't care.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So, hey, thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing you on the cruise, and best with the record. I love it.
Well, thank you so much, Ruben. It was great talking to you. And yeah, Monsters of Rock, late
Yeah.
April. We'll see you
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, we'll see you
Sounds
then.
great.
Take care. Best to you, and we'll get you guys the links and everything.
All right, man. Rock on.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.